My sister proudly posted on Facebook the day I moved out. Finally, the freeloader is gone. 500 people liked it. My own mother commented with praise hands emojis. Friends I'd known since childhood joined the celebration in the comments, laughing at my expense, validating a narrative that was so elaborately false, it would have been impressive if it wasn't soul-crushing. I sat there on the floor of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, watching my reputation get shredded in real time by the people who were supposed to love me. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Every like felt like betrayal. Every comment felt like another nail in the coffin of a family that had never really existed. I couldn't believe they'd gone this public, this cruel, this confident in their lie. But here's what none of those 500 people knew, what my family had conveniently forgotten to mention in their victory post. That house they were celebrating being freed from me, it wasn't theirs. It had never been theirs. It was mine. Legally, documented, inherited from the grandmother who loved me enough to protect me from exactly this kind of betrayal. For years I'd paid their bills, covered their expenses, absorbed their abuse, all while they sold the world a story about me being the burden they graciously tolerated. The infidelity to truth was systematic, calculated, years in the making. And that Facebook post? That cruel public declaration of my worthlessness? It was about to become the most expensive social media update they'd ever made. If you think this story is just about a cruel Facebook post, about family drama and hurt feelings, wait until you hear about the legal documents I had locked away, the receipts I'd been collecting for years, the cold, calculated justice that was about to remind them why you should never publicly humiliate someone who owns the ground you're standing on. Because what happened next wasn't hot revenge or emotional payback. It was something much more devastating. It was the truth, backed by lawyers, enforced by courts, and delivered with the kind of dignity they'd spent years trying to strip from me. They wanted to shame me into silence. Instead, they gave me the evidence I needed to reclaim everything they'd tried to take. And trust me when I say this, karma doesn't just come for people who betray you. It comes with documentation, interest, and a legal system that doesn't care how many Facebook likes you got. Let me take you back to how this all began. Not the post, but the inheritance that set everything in motion. The house at 47 Maple Street wasn't just any house. It was my grandmother's legacy, her final act of protection wrapped in legal documents and conditions I'd kept secret for years. She died when I was 23, and the reading of her will was the first time I truly understood how much she'd seen, how clearly she'd recognized the dynamics in our family that everyone else pretended didn't exist. My parents sat there expecting to inherit everything, already mentally redecorating, already planning how they'd use the equity. Then the lawyer read the clause that left the house solely to me, under specific conditions designed to shield it from exactly the kind of people my family had become. The silence in that room was deafening, and the looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know about what would come next. But my grandmother was smart. Brilliant, actually. She knew that handing me full ownership outright would paint a target on my back, would turn me into the enemy overnight. So she'd structured it carefully. I would inherit the house, but my parents could continue living there as long as they followed certain terms, paid a modest monthly amount to cover property taxes and maintenance, and treated the arrangement with basic respect. The conditions were simple, almost laughably reasonable, but they served a purpose. They put me in control without forcing an immediate confrontation. My family could stay, could maintain their image, could pretend nothing had changed, as long as they played by the rules. What I didn't realize then was that they'd never actually planned to follow any of those rules at all. Over the next 6 years, that arrangement slowly became a nightmare. From the moment those papers were signed, the emotional abuse started subtly. My mother would make comments about how I'd stolen my grandmother's house through manipulation, how I'd obviously poisoned her mind against the family. My father started treating me like hired help, like I was living in their space instead of them living in mine. My sister was the worst. She'd post photos of our family home on social media, talk about her childhood house, completely erasing my legal ownership from the narrative. They rewrote history so thoroughly that even I sometimes forgot the truth when I was drowning in their version of reality. The rent they were supposed to pay became irregular, then optional, then a joke they'd laugh about when they thought I couldn't hear. I kept working as a freelance copywriter, building my career quietly in the background while they mocked my little hobby that barely made money. The truth was, I was making more than any of them, saving strategically, preparing for a future they couldn't see coming. But I let them believe I was struggling, let them paint me as the failure who couldn't afford to move out, the burden they were graciously supporting. Every time they forgot to pay what they owed, I documented it. Every cruel comment, every social media post that erased my ownership, every time they violated the terms my grandmother had set, I recorded it all. The receipts weren't just financial. They were emotional, digital, undeniable proof of years of calculated disrespect. Living in that house became a performance I had to master. I'd sit at my desk working on campaigns that paid more than my father's monthly salary while he'd walk past and make comments about me needing to get a real job. I'd transfer money to cover the property taxes they were supposed to pay while listening to my mother complain to her friends about how I contributed nothing. The dissonance was maddening. I owned the walls they lived within, paid for the roof over their heads, held all the legal power, and yet I was treated like I was the one who should be grateful. But that was the game, wasn't it? They needed me to be the villain in their story, needed me to be the freeloader, because acknowledging the truth would shatter the entire narrative they'd built about themselves. The hardest part wasn't the insults. It was pretending they didn't land. My sister would bring her friends over and introduce me as the one who never left home, laughing like it was an inside joke everyone was in on except me. My mother would schedule family gatherings and somehow forget to tell me until everyone was already there, then act surprised when I emerged from my room. "Oh, we didn't want to bother you," she'd say with that smile that never reached her eyes. The shaming was constant, subtle, designed to erode my self-worth one comment at a time. I'd wake up at dawn to work on projects for clients across 3 time zones, building a portfolio and bank account they knew nothing about. The dignity I was supposed to have, the self-worth that should have protected me. I buried it all under layers of strategic silence, waiting for the right moment to reclaim it. Every month I'd log into the property tax portal and pay what they owed, then quietly file the receipt in a folder they didn't know existed. Every time they'd post on Facebook about our beautiful family home, with photos of renovations I'd funded, I'd screenshot it and add it to my documentation. My sister was the worst offender, the one who seemed to genuinely enjoy my suffering. She'd bring her boyfriend over and they'd sit in the living room, my living room, legally, and talk about how some people just never grow up. She'd make TikToks about family dynamics, with thinly veiled references to the sibling who's a burden, and I let her do it. Let her build this entire social media presence on the lie that she was the successful one and I was the failure. Because I knew that the higher she climbed on that fabricated narrative, the harder the fall would be when the truth came out. The final year was the hardest, because I could feel myself reaching my limit. The emotional toll of being treated like garbage in my own home while secretly funding their lifestyle was crushing me in ways I couldn't fully admit. I started therapy remotely, talking to someone who didn't know my family, who could see clearly what I was drowning in. She helped me understand that leaving wasn't weakness. It was self-preservation. It was dignity. It was the first step toward reclaiming everything they'd tried to take from me. So I started planning my exit with the same methodical precision I'd used to document their abuse. Every detail mattered. Every timeline needed to align. Because when I walked out that door, I wasn't just leaving. I was lighting a fuse on a bomb they'd been building around themselves for years, completely unaware that the explosion was coming. Planning my escape took 6 months of meticulous preparation, every detail calculated to ensure I'd never have to look back. I started by securing my finances, transferring savings to a new bank they didn't know about, closing joint accounts my mother had somehow convinced me to open years ago, building a buffer that could sustain me through whatever chaos was coming. I found an apartment across town, small but mine, a space where I could finally breathe without their toxicity seeping through the walls. The landlord ran my credit, saw my income documentation, and looked genuinely confused when I mentioned I was currently living with family. "With numbers like these, why would you need roommates?" she asked. I just smiled and signed the lease without explanation. The hardest part was acting normal while internally counting down the days. I'd sit at family dinners, listening to my sister talk about her upcoming promotion while she casually mentioned, "The freeloader needs to learn responsibility," and I'd just nod and pass the salt. My mother would make her little comments about how I'd never amount to anything, and I'd agree, saying something self-deprecating that made her smile with satisfaction. They thought they were winning, thought they'd successfully beaten me down into accepting their narrative. What they didn't know was that every insult was making my departure sweeter. Every moment of mockery was strengthening my resolve. I wasn't breaking. I was preparing, organizing, documenting every single interaction for what was coming next. I hired a lawyer quietly, someone who specialized in property law and family disputes. When I showed her the documentation I'd compiled, years of missed payments, screenshots of social media posts claiming ownership, recordings of conversations where they explicitly stated the house was theirs, she actually laughed. Not meanly, but with a kind of professional appreciation for how thoroughly I'd built my case. "This is one of the cleanest property disputes I've ever seen," she said, flipping through the folder. "They don't have a leg to stand on. We drafted the legal notices together, structured the terms carefully. They could lease the property at market rate with a formal contract, or they could vacate within 60 days. There was no room for negotiation, no emotional appeals, just cold, legal reality. The week before I moved, I made copies of everything: keys, documents, proof of ownership, payment histories. I opened a new email account and forwarded all communication there, creating a digital trail that would hold up in any court. I contacted the utility companies and prepared the paperwork to transfer everything out of my name, scheduled for exactly 1 week after my departure. I wanted to give them time to feel victorious, to really commit to their celebration before reality hit. My therapist asked if I was sure about the timing, if maybe I wanted to confront them first. But confrontation would have given them ammunition, would have let them paint me as emotional or unstable. No. I needed to leave cleanly, quietly, and let the legal system do the talking. The night before I moved out, I walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye to the rooms where my grandmother had raised me, where I'd felt safe before everything changed. I wasn't sad about leaving the house. I was sad about what it represented, what it could have been if my family had been different people. But sentiment doesn't pay bills, and nostalgia doesn't protect you from people who see you as less than human. I packed the last box, loaded my car in the pre-dawn darkness, and drove away without a single goodbye. They wouldn't even know I was gone until they woke up, wouldn't realize the significance until much later. The exit strategy wasn't dramatic. It was surgical, precise, designed to leave them comfortable enough to make their next mistake. 3 days after I left, they made that mistake. I was adjusting to the silence of my new place, to the absence of walking on eggshells, to the strange peace of not being constantly humiliated. My phone was quiet. They hadn't reached out, hadn't checked if I was okay, hadn't done anything to acknowledge my absence. Then came the notification. My sister had tagged me in a Facebook post. The same post that opened this story, the one with my empty bedroom, the celebration emojis, that phrase I'd never forget. Finally, the freeloader is gone. I read every comment as they piled up. Watched the likes climb from 50 to 100 to 500. Screenshot every single one. They'd put it in writing, tagged me, made it public, left a permanent record of their narrative. That post, the one that would have destroyed me if I hadn't been prepared, was now becoming evidence. Every screenshot I took was another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. They thought silence meant defeat, that my lack of response meant I was ashamed. But I just smiled and clicked save. Because what comes after public humiliation isn't defeat. It's payback, it's justice, and it was about to be absolutely spectacular. On day 8 of my new freedom, I sent the first letter, certified mail, signature required, delivered at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. The envelope was thick, professional, containing the legal notice my attorney had drafted along with copies of property ownership documents, payment histories, and a breakdown of every violation of my grandmother's terms they'd committed over the years. The covering letter was polite, almost pleasant. Dear family, as the legal owner of 47 Maple Street, I'm offering you 2 options. And I could imagine my father's face when he opened it, could picture my mother's hands shaking as she read the terms. Lease the property at market rate, $2,400 a month with a standard contract, or vacate within 60 days. No negotiations, no emotional appeals, just documented truth and legal consequences. My phone exploded within an hour. 12 missed calls from my mother, 7 from my father, 23 increasingly frantic texts from my sister. What the hell is this? You can't do this. This house belongs to all of us. I let them spiral, let them vent their rage into the void while I sat in my peaceful apartment drinking coffee. After a few hours, I sent one reply. All communication regarding this matter should go through my attorney. Her contact information is in the letter. Then I muted the conversation, blocked their numbers, and went back to work on a campaign for a client who actually respected me. The betrayal they felt at my sudden coldness was almost funny. They'd spent years being cruel, and now they were shocked I wouldn't engage emotionally with their tantrum. They called my lawyer 18 times that first week, each call more desperate than the last. She recorded everything, took notes on their threats, their attempts at manipulation, their claims that I was being vindictive and destroying the family. My mother tried to argue that my grandmother would have wanted us to stay, conveniently forgetting that my grandmother had quite literally written legal conditions specifically because she knew they'd try this. My sister attempted to rally social media support, posting vague things about betrayal and legal abuse, but carefully avoided mentioning any actual details because the truth would have destroyed her narrative. 2 weeks passed, and they hadn't agreed to either option. So I moved to phase 2, the utilities. I contacted every service provider, submitted proof of ownership, and formally requested disconnection or transfer. I wasn't being cruel. I was enforcing boundaries, exercising my legal right to control my property. They'd had multiple chances to legitimize their living situation, to treat me with basic dignity, to acknowledge reality. Instead, they'd chosen to dig in, to believe their own lies, to assume I'd back down because I always had before. The night the electricity went out, my sister posted a dramatic status. Can't believe some people would use power as a weapon against their own family. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. They'd used their power, social, emotional, psychological, against me for years, and now that I was using actual legal power, suddenly it was abuse? The comments were mixed this time, though. Some people were starting to ask questions. Wait, why would the electric be in her name? Doesn't she own that house? What's the full story here? The cracks were forming in their narrative, small fissures of doubt that would soon become canyons. My attorney filed the formal eviction notice at week 6, when they still hadn't complied with either option. The sheriff's department would serve it personally, making it official, making it real in a way that letters and phone calls hadn't. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was legal action, documented and irreversible. The karma they'd been building was finally catching up. The vengeance they'd earned through years of humiliation was arriving in the form of legal documents and court dates. The panic started the day after the eviction notice was served. My mother called my lawyer's office 6 times in 3 hours, each message more desperate than the last, begging for just a conversation or a chance to explain. My father, who'd spent years treating me like hired help, suddenly wanted to work things out as a family. My sister's social media presence, built entirely on portraying herself as the successful, stable one, went silent for the first time in years. The house without power, without heat in October, without the basic infrastructure of modern life, suddenly felt less like their family home and more like the legal property it had always been. They lasted 4 days before my father showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as he knocked, called my name, tried to sound reasonable and calm. "Claire, please, we need to talk about this. Your mother is suffering. Your sister is embarrassed. This isn't who we are." The audacity was almost impressive. After years of humiliation, of being called a freeloader in front of hundreds of people, of having my self-worth systematically destroyed, he wanted to appeal to my sense of family loyalty? I didn't open the door. Instead, I called my lawyer on speakerphone right there in the hallway, loud enough for him to hear. "My father is at my residence attempting to contact me directly. Please note this for the court record." His footsteps retreated quickly after that, the sound of his pride crumbling echoing down the hallway. The court date arrived faster than they expected. Property disputes with clear documentation move quickly through the system. I walked into that courthouse with a 3-inch binder of evidence. Every missed payment documented with bank statements. Every social media post claiming ownership printed and dated. Every text message where they'd insulted or dismissed me. Every violation of my grandmother's conditions highlighted and cross-referenced. My lawyer laid it out methodically, building a case so comprehensive that the judge barely looked at their attorney's weak attempts at emotional appeals. "This is about family," their lawyer tried to argue. "This is about property law," the judge corrected, flipping through page after page of undeniable proof. The judge's ruling was swift and absolute. They had 30 days to vacate, no extensions, no appeals worth pursuing. The documented evidence of non-payment, combined with their public social media statements claiming ownership they didn't have, had buried them completely. My sister tried to speak up, to tell the judge how unfair this was, how I was destroying the family out of spite. The judge cut her off. "Ma'am, your sister owns the property. She offered you reasonable terms. You refused. The law doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about contracts and documentation. This hearing is concluded." The gavel came down like punctuation on years of lies, and I watched them file out of that courtroom looking smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences they'd never believed would actually come. The next weeks were a blur of supervised move-outs and itemized property inspections. They damaged things, small, petty acts of revenge like scratched floors and broken cabinet handles, but every instance was photographed, documented, added to the bill I'd eventually send. My mother tried one last emotional appeal through a mutual friend, a message about how I was breaking her heart and destroying the family legacy Grandma would have wanted preserved. But my grandmother's legacy wasn't the house. It was the lesson she'd tried to teach them through her will: respect, boundaries, and the understanding that love without conditions isn't really love at all. The day they finally moved out completely, I walked through the house alone for the first time since inheriting it. Truly alone, without their presence haunting every room. The walls felt different, lighter somehow, like the house itself was relieved to be free of their toxicity. I stood in the kitchen where my grandmother used to make me breakfast, where she'd whispered to me once, years before she died, "You're stronger than they know, sweetheart. Don't let them convince you otherwise." She'd seen it all, had known exactly what would happen, had given me the tools to fight back when the time was right. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was justice. It was reclaiming what was mine. It was finally enforcing the boundaries they'd trampled for years. There was one final legal step: a damages hearing to address the unpaid obligations and property damage. My family's attorney tried every emotional angle he could think of. "This young woman is destroying her family over money," he argued, gesturing at me like I was the villain in some morality play. "She's using legal technicalities to evict her own parents, her own sister, to leave them homeless out of spite." The words hung in the air for a moment before my lawyer stood, adjusted her glasses, and systematically demolished every single claim with documentation they couldn't refute. Bank records showing I'd paid over $47,000 in property expenses they were contractually obligated to cover. Text messages where my father explicitly called it our house, despite knowing the legal reality. Screenshots of that Facebook post, "Finally, the freeloader is gone," blown up and presented as evidence of their narrative building. The judge studied the evidence with careful attention. "Ms. Martinez," he said, addressing my lawyer, "this is one of the most thorough property cases I've reviewed this year." He turned to my family's attorney. "Your clients have systematically violated the terms of the inheritance, failed to make required payments, publicly claimed ownership they don't possess, and are now attempting to use emotional appeals to override legal documentation." My mother made a sound, half sob, half protest. But the judge raised his hand. "I understand this is difficult, but the law is clear. The property belongs to Ms. Claire Hartford. Your clients were given opportunities to legitimize their residency. They chose not to comply. The damages assessment stands, and I'm adding a restraining order to prevent further harassment." The judge ordered them to pay $31,400 in back payments plus court costs and issued a permanent restraining order preventing them from contacting me except through legal counsel. As we left the courtroom, my sister finally broke her silence, hissing at me in the hallway. "You're going to regret this. Everyone will know what you did." I stopped, turned to face her fully for the first time in months, and said the only words I'd spoken to her since that Facebook post. "They already know, Sarah. You told them. You posted it publicly, remember? You just didn't tell them the truth." Her face went pale as she realized her own social media presence was about to become evidence against her in the court of public opinion. That every post she'd made claiming the house as ours was now proof of fraud. That the same platform she'd used to humiliate me was going to be her downfall. The house sold faster than I expected, snapped up by a young couple with a baby on the way, who walked through the rooms talking about fresh starts and building memories. I watched them during the final walkthrough, pointing excitedly at the kitchen my grandmother had renovated, discussing paint colors for the bedroom where I'd spent so many nights planning my escape. Part of me felt a pang, not for my family, but for what the house represented, for the grandmother who'd loved me enough to protect me even after death. But holding on to that property would have meant holding on to the trauma embedded in its walls, the years of humiliation that soaked into the floorboards. Selling it wasn't giving up. It was liberation. It was cutting the last thread connecting me to people who'd proven they'd never truly seen me as family at all. The money from the sale was substantial, enough to put a down payment on a small condo across town, establish a real emergency fund, and invest in the freelance business I'd been building in the shadows. I hired a financial advisor, a therapist, and a business consultant, basically building a team of people who actually supported my growth instead of undermining it. The dignity I'd been reclaiming piece by piece started to feel solid, permanent, like something that couldn't be shaken by cruel Facebook posts or family shame campaigns. I changed my phone number, locked down my social media, and made it clear to mutual acquaintances that I wasn't interested in updates about my family's situation. The separation needed to be clean, absolute, surgical. No half measures, no lingering connections that could be exploited later. My sister made one last attempt to reach me through a mutual friend about 3 months after the sale. The message was long, rambling, oscillating between apologies and accusations. "I'm sorry for the post, but you ruined our lives. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you left us homeless. Can't we just talk like adults?" The manipulation was almost artistic, equal parts victim and aggressor, designed to make me feel guilty for enforcing boundaries. I read it once, felt the old familiar tug of family obligation trying to pull me back into their dysfunction, and then deleted it without responding. Because I'd learned that family betrayal doesn't get healed through more conversations. It gets healed through space, time, and the firm understanding that some bridges need to stay burned for your own survival. The legal settlement money trickled in slowly, monthly payments from my father's garnished wages, a lump sum my mother scraped together by selling her car. I used part of the money to fund therapy, diving deep into the patterns that had let me accept their treatment for so long, understanding the difference between patience and people-pleasing, between strategic silence and unhealthy suppression. My therapist asked me once if I felt guilty about the eviction, about the financial consequences they faced. I thought about it carefully before answering. I feel sad that it was necessary. But guilty? No. They had every opportunity to do the right thing. I didn't destroy our family. I just stopped letting them destroy me. A year after the sale, I bought my own place. A small 2-bedroom condo with huge windows and a balcony overlooking the city. The mortgage was in my name only, the utilities mine, the title clear and unchallengeable. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, filled it with plants and books and art that meant something to me, created a space that felt like mine in a way that house never had. The reclaiming of my life wasn't just about the legal victory or the financial compensation. It was about building something entirely new, something they couldn't touch or taint or claim any part of. I started dating again, made new friends who knew me only as Claire, the successful copywriter, not Claire, the family freeloader. The final separation came not with drama or confrontation, but with quiet certainty. The understanding that some family bonds are toxic, some betrayals are unforgivable, and walking away isn't weakness but wisdom. I stopped checking their social media, stopped wondering if they were okay, stopped carrying the weight of their choices on my shoulders. They'd made their bed through years of calculated cruelty, and now they could lie in it without me there to cushion the fall. Looking back now, 18 months after that Facebook post, I can finally see the whole arc of what happened. Not just the betrayal and revenge, but the transformation that came from refusing to stay small for people who needed me diminished. The lesson wasn't that family doesn't matter. It's that family is earned through love, respect, and boundaries, not demanded through DNA and manipulation. My grandmother understood this when she structured that inheritance, protecting me from people she loved but didn't trust. She'd given me more than property. She'd given me permission to choose myself, to enforce dignity even when it looked like cruelty to people who'd spent years being cruel without consequence. The shocking thing about karma isn't that it comes, it's that it comes exactly as deserved, perfectly calibrated to the offense. My family wanted to publicly shame me, to use social media as a weapon to destroy my reputation and validate their narrative. Instead, their own posts became evidence against them. Their own words documented their fraud. Their own public celebration of my departure became the catalyst for their legal destruction. I didn't have to be cruel or vindictive. I just had to be honest, documented, and willing to enforce the boundaries they'd trampled for years. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it ended, if there was a way it could have gone differently. The truth is, yes. If they'd honored the terms of my grandmother's will, if they'd paid what they owed, if they'd treated me with basic human dignity, we could all still be living in that house together. If my sister hadn't posted that cruel Facebook status, if my mother hadn't validated it, if my father hadn't spent years belittling my work and worth, the ending could have been different. But that's not how they chose to play it. The lesson that echoed loudest through this whole experience is that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful form of resistance. When they humiliated me publicly, I could have fought back in the comments, could have defended myself emotionally, could have made it a messy public spectacle. Instead, I let them commit fully to their lie, let them build an entire narrative on a foundation of fraud, let them celebrate so loudly that the fall would be impossible to hide. Strategic silence gave me power they never saw coming, created space for documentation instead of drama, built a legal case that no emotional appeal could overturn. The real liberation came not from watching them lose, but from rebuilding myself without their voices in my head. For years, their criticism had become my inner dialogue. You're not good enough. You'll never succeed. You're a burden, a freeloader, a failure. Breaking free from their physical presence was only half the battle. Breaking free from their psychological colonization took months of therapy, journaling, conscious rewiring of thought patterns that had been carved into my psyche over decades. The dignity I reclaimed wasn't just legal or financial, it was internal. The slow realization that I was never the problem, that their need to diminish me said everything about their insecurities and nothing about my worth. What I know now, what I wish I could tell anyone trapped in similar dynamics, is that public humiliation often backfires on those who rely on it. That boundaries enforced legally are kinder than boundaries enforced emotionally, and that walking away from toxic family isn't betrayal. It's survival. The shocking truth they never wanted exposed was that I'd been the one holding everything together, paying their bills, maintaining the property, enabling their lifestyle while they mocked mine. When I finally stopped, when I finally chose self-worth over their approval, the whole structure collapsed under the weight of their own dishonesty. And standing here now, in a life I built entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually value me, I can finally say what I couldn't say in that Facebook comment section 18 months ago. I'm not sorry. Not for leaving, not for seeking justice, not for choosing dignity over their dysfunction. The truth, as it turns out, really does set you free. It just takes longer and costs more than anyone tells you at the beginning. So that's my story. The Facebook post that backfired, the family that underestimated silence, the justice that came not from anger but from documentation and boundaries I finally had the courage to enforce. But here's what I really want to know. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who thought you were powerless? Have you ever stayed silent while people wrote a completely false narrative about your life? What would you have done differently? Confronted them immediately or played the long game like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this. Was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Tell me your story. What's the moment you finally chose dignity over keeping the peace? And if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the villain in someone else's story when you were actually the one being wronged, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because I'm here every week sharing stories that dig deeper than surface-level drama. Stories about reclaiming self-worth, about the real cost of family betrayal, about what happens when you finally stop accepting treatment you never deserved. These aren't just revenge stories. They're survival stories, liberation stories, reminders that walking away from toxicity isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. So subscribe, stay connected, and let's keep having these real conversations about the messy, complicated truth of standing up for yourself when everyone expects you to stay small. I'll see you in the next one.